Welcome to the story at a luxury restaurant. A millionaire sees his pregnant ex-wife while out to dinner with her new girlfriend. But he is very shocked. The chance encounter leads to unexpected revelations that will leave you speechless. As the evening begins, the millionaire is enjoying a quiet dinner with his new partner, soaking in the ambiance of a luxurious restaurant. Little does he know, the night is about to take a dramatic turn. Suddenly, he spots his ex-wife across the room, visibly pregnant. The sight stirs a whirlwind of memories and emotions, prompting an internal struggle between his past and present. The millionaire's girlfriend quickly senses the tension in the air. She becomes an unwilling participant in an unfolding drama that tests the strength of their bond. Meanwhile, the ex-wife's presence and her condition raise questions about their past and the implications for their future. This emotional encounter opens a dialogue about forgiveness, responsibility, and the possibility of second chances. Inform us if you are enthusiastic about this narrative. If you are, press 1 if you found the video to be enjoyable. If this is not the case, press 0. Your comments are a great source of motivation for me to collect more stories that are uplifting and meaningful.
The golden glow of the city lights reflected off the sleek glass windows of the limousine as it pulled up to Amaretto, the newest and most exclusive restaurant in town. Lincoln Davis adjusted his cufflinks, the subtle flash of his platinum watch catching the soft interior light. Beside him, Ruth sat poised and elegant, her sequin dress sparkling with every turn of her wrist. She was everything the evening demanded, polished, glamorous, and exuding the same air of affluence that surrounded him. "Do you think they'll have truffle risotto?" Ruth asked, her tone casual but tinged with excitement. "I've been craving it all week." Lincoln smiled and nodded. "If they don't, I'll make sure they do. Tonight's about celebrating. Nothing's off the table." The restaurant was the perfect backdrop for their evening, a modern masterpiece with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the skyline. The maitre d' greeted them with a wide smile, ushering them toward a table draped in crisp white linens. The room hummed with quiet sophistication, every detail meticulously arranged to exude exclusivity. Ruth leaned in as they sat. "This place is incredible. You always know how to pick them." Lincoln allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Tonight wasn't just about the product launch. It was about reminding himself, and everyone else, that he was at the top of his game. Success, after all, was best celebrated with the right company and an impeccable setting. As they scanned the menus, Lincoln caught a glimpse of a server moving toward their table. He barely registered her at first, just another uniformed staff member weaving through the polished crowd, but something about her gait pulled his attention. When she stepped closer, his breath caught. Harper. Her hair, once so familiar, was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform, a black blouse and apron, was far removed from the elegant dresses she used to wear. But it was her face, framed by the same soft features he once traced with his fingers, that sent his thoughts tumbling. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed by long days and restless nights, but there was a glow about her. It took him a moment to realize why. She was pregnant. Lincoln's heart lurched, a cascade of emotions hitting him all at once: shock, guilt, and a sharp pang of something he couldn't quite name. The woman who had once been his world was now standing before him, carrying a life he knew nothing about. "Good evening," Harper said, her voice calm and professional. "Can I get you started with some drinks?" Ruth, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension crackling between them, smiled brightly. "I'll have a glass of your best Chardonnay." "Lincoln?" Lincoln struggled to find his voice, his mind racing to reconcile the woman in front of him with the memories he'd tried so hard to bury. Finally, he managed. "Water for now." "Sparkling." Harper nodded, her expression giving nothing away, and jotted the orders down on her notepad. For a fleeting moment, her eyes met his, and he thought he saw a flicker of something: resentment? Sadness? Before she quickly looked away. "I'll be right back," she said, turning on her heel and disappearing into the sea of diners. Lincoln stared after her, his appetite suddenly gone. He could still hear her voice, softer now, tangled with the echoes of their past late-night talks, whispered dreams, and arguments that had grown louder with each passing year. He had told himself that their divorce was inevitable, that their lives were moving in different directions. Yet seeing her now, with a baby on the way, he couldn't help but feel he had missed something crucial. Ruth's voice broke through his thoughts. "Earth to Lincoln?" He blinked, realizing she was looking at him expectantly. "Sorry. What were you saying?" "I was asking if you're okay. You've been staring off into space since we got here." She tilted her head, her expression laced with concern. "Something wrong?" "No," he said too quickly, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about work. It's been a long week." Ruth's eyes narrowed, but she let it go, returning her attention to the menu. Lincoln, however, couldn't stop the images flooding his mind, Harper smiling at him across their old kitchen table, laughing as they danced in the rain during their honeymoon, her tears the night they finally admitted they couldn't make it work. When Harper returned with their drinks, she placed them on the table with practiced efficiency. "Are you ready to order?" Ruth rattled off her choice, but Lincoln hesitated. His eyes flicked to Harper's face, searching for a sign, a cue, anything to anchor him in this moment. Finally, he gave his order, his voice quieter than usual. As Harper scribbled it down, Ruth leaned forward, her voice warm but curious. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" For the first time that evening, Harper hesitated. She glanced at Lincoln, a subtle question in her eyes, before shaking her head. "I don't think so. I just started working here a few months ago." Lincoln felt his throat tighten. The idea of Harper, a woman who once managed marketing campaigns for global brands, waiting tables was almost too much to process. Yet she carried herself with the same quiet dignity he remembered, her head held high despite the circumstances. When she walked away again, Ruth turned to him, her brow furrowed. "Is it just me, or was that a little weird?" Lincoln forced a laugh. "You're imagining things. Let's focus on tonight, okay?" But even as he said the words, he knew they were hollow. His thoughts kept drifting back to Harper, the baby, the tired lines around her eyes, and the unspoken stories hidden behind her composed exterior. He couldn't help but wonder, how had she ended up here? And why did seeing her now, after all these years, feel like a second chance he hadn't asked for but desperately needed? Dinner stretched on, but Lincoln barely registered the conversation. Ruth talked about their upcoming trip to the Maldives and the latest art installation she wanted for their penthouse. But Lincoln's mind was elsewhere. Across the room, Harper moved between tables, her smile polite but distant. He couldn't shake the image of her standing in their old apartment, telling him she couldn't do it anymore, that his work would always come first. The evening ended with dessert, Ruth's favorite crème brûlée, but by the time they left the restaurant, Lincoln's celebration felt hollow. As they stepped into the cool night air, Ruth slipped her arm through his, smiling up at him. "That was perfect." "Thank you." Lincoln nodded absently, his gaze flicking back toward the restaurant's glowing entrance. Inside, Harper was somewhere, going about her night, unaware of the storm she had stirred within him. As the car pulled away, Lincoln leaned back in his seat, staring out at the city lights. The life he had built felt solid, unshakable. Yet tonight, for the first time in years, he felt the faintest cracks forming in its foundation. And in those cracks he saw Harper, tired but resilient, pregnant and strong, reminding him of everything he had once had, and everything he might have lost. The city blurred past the limousine window, streaks of light and shadow painting the glass. Lincoln sat in silence, his fingers tapping an absent rhythm on the armrest. Ruth scrolled through her phone beside him, humming softly to herself. The air inside the car felt thick, the celebratory mood that had started the evening now a distant memory. "You're quiet," Ruth said suddenly, breaking the silence. She looked up from her screen, her brow furrowing as she studied him. "Is something bothering you? You've been off since dinner." Lincoln hesitated, caught off guard. "No, just tired, I think. It's been a big week." Ruth didn't look convinced, her gaze lingering on him a moment longer. "Well, try to relax. We're going to the Maldives in a few days. You deserve a break after everything you've accomplished." He forced a smile and nodded, but his thoughts were miles away, back in that restaurant. More specifically, back with Harper. Her face, her presence, her pregnancy, they churned in his mind like a storm he couldn't escape. The weight of the encounter lingered, pulling him into memories he hadn't revisited in years. Lincoln hadn't always been the man he was now. There was a time when ambition wasn't the singular focus of his life, when late nights at the office and early mornings on conference calls didn't define his existence. Harper had been there during those early years, long before he had become the CEO of Davis Industries, back when they were both dreaming about a future that felt limitless. They had met at a small marketing firm where Harper had been a rising star, her creativity and charisma lighting up every room she entered. Lincoln had been drawn to her immediately, her passion, her laugh, the way she could make even the dullest meetings feel electric. Their connection had been undeniable, and it wasn't long before they were inseparable. In the beginning, everything had felt easy. They were partners in every sense of the word, building their lives together with a shared sense of purpose. Harper had supported Lincoln's aspirations, even when his work began to take up more of his time. She believed in him, in his vision, and he had promised her that all the sacrifices they were making would be worth it. But as Davis Industries grew, so did the distance between them. Lincoln threw himself into his work with a single-minded determination, convinced that success would justify everything, the late nights, the missed dinners, the vacations they never took. Harper, meanwhile, had started to crave something different. She talked about wanting a life that felt meaningful in ways money couldn't buy. She wanted stability, connection, a family. Lincoln could still remember the night it all came to a head. They had been sitting in their apartment, the skyline twinkling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, when Harper told him she couldn't keep living like this. Her voice had been steady, but her eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't need the penthouse or the trips or the endless work dinners," she had said. "I just need you." "But you're not here anymore, Lincoln." "Not really." He had tried to argue, to explain that everything he was doing was for them, but Harper had only shaken her head, her expression full of a sadness he hadn't known how to fix. A week later she had moved out. Lincoln had told himself it was for the best. They wanted different things, and it was better to let her go than keep holding her back. But sitting in the car now, with Ruth beside him and Harper's face fresh in his mind, he couldn't help but question that narrative. Had it really been for the best? Or had he simply been too consumed by his ambition to fight for the woman he loved? The car pulled to a stop in front of Ruth's building, snapping Lincoln out of his thoughts. She turned to him, her smile bright but expectant. "Are you coming up?" Lincoln hesitated, then shook his head. "I've got some work to finish up tonight." "Rain check?" Ruth's smile faltered, but she nodded, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "Don't work too hard. You're allowed to enjoy your success, you know." He waited until she disappeared into the building before telling the driver to head back to his penthouse. The silence of the car was deafening, and Lincoln's mind kept looping back to Harper, her tired eyes and the undeniable swell of her belly. Who was the father? Was she happy? Was she okay? The questions haunted him all the way home. The next morning, Lincoln sat in his office, a sleek, minimalist space high above the city. He stared at the report on his desk, the words swimming in front of him. For the first time in years, he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting to Harper, to the way she had looked at him last night, calm, professional, but distant. It was as though she had built a wall between them, and Lincoln wasn't sure he could blame her. Ruth called him around noon, her voice cheerful as she chatted about their trip. He responded in kind, but his heart wasn't in it. She noticed. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked. "You sound distracted." "I'm fine," he said too quickly. "Just a lot on my plate right now." There was a pause, then Ruth's voice turned curious. "Is this about last night? About that waitress? You seemed weird after she came to the table." Lincoln's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Ruth said, her tone light but probing. "You just got quiet. And she did seem kind of familiar. Do you know her?" He hesitated, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. "She's someone I used to know. A long time ago." Ruth didn't push, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Lincoln could feel it in her voice, in the way she lingered before saying goodbye. He ended the call and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The memories kept coming, unbidden and relentless. He saw Harper on their wedding day, radiant and full of hope. He saw her curled up on their couch, a book in her lap, laughing at something he had said. He saw her walking away from him, her shoulders straight but her steps heavy. And now he had seen her again, carrying a new life and wearing the exhaustion of someone who had been through more than he could imagine. The questions in his mind only grew louder, more insistent. He couldn't ignore them, couldn't push them aside like he had so many other things. For the first time in years, Lincoln felt a pull toward the past, a need to understand what had gone wrong, and whether it was too late to make things right. Lincoln's thoughts swirled endlessly in the days following the dinner at Amaretto. He found himself replaying every detail, every expression on Harper's face. The calm way she had handled herself, the flicker of something, pain maybe, when their eyes met. Most of all, he couldn't stop thinking about her pregnancy. The questions were like a persistent hum in the back of his mind, growing louder the more he tried to push them aside. At work, Lincoln struggled to concentrate. Meetings felt like background noise, and even the congratulatory messages about the product launch failed to bring him any real satisfaction. His assistant, Claire, noticed his distraction but didn't comment, instead keeping her usual efficiency intact. Lincoln appreciated her professionalism but knew he wasn't fooling anyone. By the end of the week, the weight of his thoughts was too much to bear. He needed answers. He started with a simple call to an old mutual friend, Lily, who had remained close to Harper after the divorce. Lincoln hadn't spoken to her in years, their conversations having dwindled after his and Harper's separation. Still, when he reached out, Lily didn't sound surprised. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," she said, her tone both amused and cautious. Lincoln hesitated. "Did she mention seeing me?" "No," Lily said slowly. "But I know she's been working at Amaretto. You must have run into her." "I did," Lincoln admitted. He hesitated again before asking. "She's pregnant. Is she okay?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Lincoln could picture Lily weighing her words carefully. "She's fine," she said finally. "But it hasn't been easy for her. Harper left her job a while ago to start her own interior design business. Things were going well at first, but you know how unpredictable that kind of work can be. She ended up taking the job at Amaretto to make ends meet." Lincoln felt a pang of guilt. Harper had always been ambitious, but her ambitions had been different from his. While he chased financial success and prestige, she had sought fulfillment and creativity. Hearing that she had struggled brought back a wave of memories he wasn't ready for. "And the baby?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "It's hers," Lily said, her tone softening. "The father isn't in the picture. She's planning to raise the baby on her own." The words hit Lincoln harder than he expected. He tried to imagine Harper navigating pregnancy alone while working long hours and managing everything else. The image made his chest tighten. "She never reached out," Lincoln said, almost to himself. "She wouldn't," Lily replied. "Harper's not the type to ask for help, especially from you. She's proud, Lincoln. And after everything that happened between you two, well, she's moved on. Or at least, she's trying to." The conversation ended shortly after, but Lily's words lingered. Lincoln couldn't shake the guilt that followed him everywhere, guilt for the way their marriage had ended, for the choices he had made, and now for the life Harper was living without him. At home, Lincoln tried to distract himself with work, but his focus kept slipping. Ruth noticed. She had been patient for the first few days, chalking up his distance to post-launch stress, but her frustration finally boiled over during dinner at his penthouse. "You're barely listening to me," Ruth said, setting her wine glass down with a little too much force. "I've been talking about our trip for 10 minutes, and you haven't said a word." Lincoln looked up, startled. I'm sorry. My mind's just been elsewhere. Yeah, I've noticed, Ruth said, her voice sharp. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. This is about her, isn't it? The waitress. Harper. Lincoln tensed. Ruth, it's not what you think. Oh, isn't it? She snapped. Because ever since that night, you've been distracted, distant. I'm not stupid, Lincoln. I can tell when something, or someone, is taking up space in your head. Lincoln rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on him. It's complicated. That's not an answer, Ruth shot back. Are you still in love with her? The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for far too long. Lincoln didn't know how to respond. Was he still in love with Harper? He wasn't sure if love was the right word for what he was feeling, but the emotions stirred up by seeing her again were undeniable. I don't know, he said finally, his voice quiet. Ruth let out a bitter laugh. At least you're honest. She stood, grabbing her purse and slinging it over her shoulder. You need to figure out what you want, Lincoln. And until you do, don't call me. With that, she walked out, leaving Lincoln alone in the silence of his penthouse. He stared at the door for a long time, the echo of her words replaying in his mind. He should have felt angry, or at least defensive, but all he felt was exhaustion. Ruth wasn't wrong. He did need to figure out what he wanted. The problem was, he wasn't sure if he could. The next day, Lincoln found himself scrolling through his phone, looking at pictures from the early days of his relationship with Harper. There was one from their first trip together, her smile bright and carefree as they stood on a windy cliffside. Another from a holiday party, her cheeks flushed from the cold as she laughed at something just out of frame. Each photo brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad, and Lincoln couldn't help but wonder how things had gone so wrong. He thought about what Lily had said, about Harper's pride and her determination to handle things on her own. It was one of the things he had always admired about her, but now it felt like a barrier he didn't know how to break through. He wanted to help, to be there for her in some way, but he wasn't sure if she would even let him. Lincoln spent the rest of the weekend in a haze, torn between the life he had built and the one he had left behind. The questions about Harper, about her pregnancy, and about his own feelings refused to leave him alone. By Sunday night, he made a decision. He couldn't keep living in this limbo, stuck between the past and the present. If he wanted answers, if he wanted any chance at closure, or maybe something more, he needed to talk to Harper. Directly. No more speculation, no more second-hand information. Just the truth, whatever it might be. As he sat in his office the next morning, Lincoln picked up his phone and stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, taking a deep breath, he dialed the number for Amaretto. Good afternoon, the hostess answered. How can I help you? I'd like to speak to Harper, Lincoln said, his voice steady despite the nerves twisting in his stomach. Harper Whitmore. There was a pause. I'm sorry, but we don't typically interrupt our staff during shifts. Can I take a message? Lincoln hesitated, then said, Tell her it's Lincoln. Lincoln Davis. And that I'd like to see her. The hostess promised to pass the message along, and as Lincoln hung up, he felt the first flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was tentative, fragile, but it was there. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready to follow it. The hum of the city filled the air as Lincoln stepped out of the car in front of Amaretto, his tailored suit brushing against the cool evening breeze. It was the same restaurant, the same glowing sign, but this time he was alone. His excuse for returning was thin, some fabricated business meeting he'd casually mentioned to Claire. But the truth was, he had no meeting. He just couldn't shake the need to see Harper again. Inside, the atmosphere was just as he remembered it, elegant and alive with soft murmurs of conversation and the clink of silverware. He spotted her almost immediately, moving between tables with a practiced ease, her black blouse and apron blending into the dimly lit backdrop of polished wood and white tablecloths. Lincoln sat at a small corner table, deliberately choosing a spot where he wouldn't be immediately noticeable. When Harper finally approached, her expression shifted from neutral professionalism to something guarded, her movements slowing as she came to stand beside him. "Lincoln," she said evenly, her tone carefully devoid of emotion. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." He glanced at the empty seat across from him, then back at her. "I was hoping we could talk." Her lips pressed into a thin line, her hesitation clear. "I'm working." "I know," he said quickly, lowering his voice. "But just a few minutes. Please." Harper's eyes flicked around the room, scanning for her manager or another server who might intervene. She sighed softly, setting her tray on the edge of the table. "Fine. But make it quick." Lincoln gestured to the seat across from him, but Harper shook her head. "I can't sit." "What do you want?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice even further. "I wanted to see how you're doing. After everything. I know I don't have the right to ask, but I just needed to know." Harper crossed her arms, her posture rigid. "Why now, Lincoln? It's been years. You've moved on. So have I." "I saw you, Harper," he said, his voice quieter but no less intense. "That night. You were pregnant, working here, and I can't stop thinking about it. I need to understand." Her eyes softened for just a moment before she caught herself, her professional mask slipping back into place. "I'm fine. I don't need your pity." "It's not pity," he said firmly. "It's concern. I'm not trying to make this harder for you, I swear. But you looked tired. Stressed. And if there's any way I can help. She cut him off, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "Lincoln, I don't need you swooping in to save me. I've been managing just fine without you." "I know you have," he said gently. "But you don't have to do everything alone." Harper's jaw tightened, but she didn't immediately reply. Instead, she glanced toward the kitchen, her body tense as though she were debating whether to walk away. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders sagging ever so slightly. "Fine. 10 minutes. Meet me out back when I finish my shift." Lincoln nodded, his chest tightening with relief. He watched as she walked away, her posture straight and her pace brisk, and he wondered if he had just pushed too far. The alley behind the restaurant was quieter than Lincoln had expected, the muffled sounds of the city fading into the background. Harper emerged a few minutes later, her apron gone and her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She looked different in the soft glow of the streetlights, less guarded, more herself. For a moment, Lincoln was transported back to a time when seeing her like this was a daily occurrence. She leaned against the brick wall, crossing her arms as she faced him. "Talk." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I heard about the interior design business. From Lily." Harper's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "I also heard that it's been challenging," he continued, "and that you're doing all of this on your own. I can't imagine how hard that must be." "It's not easy," she admitted after a moment, her voice softer now. "But it's mine. After the divorce, I needed something that felt like mine. So, I left the corporate world and started taking on small projects. Word spread, and for a while it was great. But then the market shifted, and clients started drying up." She glanced down, her fingers brushing against her stomach in an unconscious gesture. "When I found out I was pregnant, I had to pick up shifts here to cover the bills. It's not glamorous, but it pays." Lincoln's gaze dropped to her hand, resting protectively over her belly. "And the baby's father?" Harper's lips pressed into a tight line. "He's not in the picture. It wasn't serious, and when I told him, he made it clear he didn't want to be involved. So, it's just me." The words hit Lincoln harder than he expected. Harper had always been strong, but the thought of her facing something as monumental as single parenthood alone made his chest ache. "You shouldn't have to do this by yourself," he said quietly. "Harper, I know I messed up. I know I let you down, and I can't undo that. But if there's anything I can do now, anything at all, I want to help." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Why, Lincoln? Why do you care all of a sudden?" "Because I never stopped caring," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, I just didn't know how to show it. And now, I don't want to make the same mistakes again." Harper's eyes softened, and for the first time that evening, she let her guard drop completely. "I don't know if I can trust you, Lincoln. Not after everything." "You don't have to decide that now," he said quickly. "But let me help, even if it's just as a friend. I can connect you with people who can grow your business. Make sure you don't have to rely on this place to get by. No strings attached." She hesitated, her hand still resting protectively over her stomach. Finally, she nodded, just once. "Okay. But only because it's for the baby." Lincoln smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that he hadn't felt in years. For the baby. As they stood there, the city's quiet hum surrounding them, Lincoln felt something shift. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally moving in the right direction. Lincoln couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Harper. Her words echoed in his mind as he sat in his penthouse that night, the city's lights twinkling outside the massive windows. The place felt colder than usual, the silence almost oppressive. For years he had measured his worth by the size of his accomplishments, the deals closed, the markets conquered, the wealth accumulated. But sitting there, surrounded by all the trappings of his success, he felt strangely hollow. Harper had always valued the things he had neglected: family, connection, balance. Back then, he had dismissed her priorities as naive, believing that success required sacrifice. Now, he wasn't so sure. The image of her standing in that alley, tired but unbroken, stayed with him. She was fighting for something bigger than herself, something real. And what was he fighting for? Another zero on his bank balance? Another headline in the business section? For the first time in years, Lincoln began to wonder if he'd been chasing the wrong things all along. The next morning, his routine felt off. His usual coffee tasted bitter, his meetings dragged on longer than they should have, and even the congratulatory messages from his board about the product launch felt hollow. His assistant, Claire, noticed. "You okay, Mr. Davis?" she asked cautiously as she placed a file on his desk. "You've been distracted lately." Lincoln looked up, startled by the observation. "I'm fine, Claire. Just a lot on my mind." She hesitated before nodding and leaving the room, but her expression made it clear she didn't believe him. Lincoln didn't blame her. He didn't believe himself either. That evening, Ruth showed up unannounced at his penthouse, her stilettos clicking against the marble floor as she walked in. She was dressed impeccably, as always, her makeup flawless, her smile bright. But there was an edge to her voice as she greeted him. "I've been giving you space," she began, her tone casual but calculated. "But I think it's time we talked." Lincoln set his glass of whiskey down on the coffee table, bracing himself. "About what?" "About whatever's going on with you," Ruth said, sitting gracefully on the couch across from him. "You've been distant, distracted. And I think I know why." He stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "It's Harper, isn't it?" she said, her eyes narrowing. "Ever since that night at the restaurant, you've been acting differently. Don't try to deny it." Lincoln sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not going to deny it. I saw her, and it brought back a lot. She's going through a tough time, and I want to help." Ruth's laugh was sharp and cold. "Help? Lincoln, she's your ex-wife. Whatever she's going through is not your responsibility. You're with me now." "I know that," he said, his voice steady but firm. "But I can't just ignore it. She's someone I cared about, someone I still care about in some way." Ruth's expression darkened. "So what? You're going to play savior? Throw money at her and feel better about yourself?" "It's not about money," he said, standing now, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's about doing the right thing. Something I didn't do enough of when we were together." Ruth rose to her feet as well, her heels bringing her almost level with him. "And what about us, Lincoln? Are you just going to throw this away because your ex suddenly reappeared?" Lincoln met her gaze, the weight of the moment settling over him. "I don't think this has been working for a while, Ruth. We've been going through the motions, but there's no real connection. Not like there should be." Her face froze, her carefully composed mask cracking for just a moment before she recovered. "I see," she said, her voice icy. "So that's it then?" He nodded, his heart heavy but certain. "I think it's best for both of us." Ruth grabbed her purse, her movements sharp and deliberate. "You'll regret this," she said as she walked toward the door. "You always do." The door slammed behind her, leaving Lincoln alone in the vast, empty space of his penthouse. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing even as a pang of guilt settled in. He didn't regret his decision, but that didn't make it any easier. Over the next few weeks, Lincoln found himself focusing more on Harper and less on the demands of his company. He reached out to a few trusted contacts in the design industry, discreetly putting in good words for her and sending potential clients her way. He also arranged for her to meet with a financial advisor, ensuring her business had the support it needed to thrive. He didn't tell Harper about any of it. She was proud, and he knew she wouldn't accept the help if she thought it was charity. Instead, he let the opportunities come to her organically, hoping she would seize them without suspicion. Their interactions at the restaurant became more frequent but remained brief. Harper was polite but guarded, her walls firmly in place. Lincoln respected her boundaries, but he also made it clear that he was there for her if she ever needed anything. One evening, as they sat in the back alley after her shift, Harper finally broke the silence. "I don't know why you're doing all this, Lincoln. Helping me, I mean. You don't owe me anything." He looked at her, his expression earnest. "I'm not doing it because I owe you. I'm doing it because I care. And because I want to." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for any sign of ulterior motives. Finally, she nodded, a small, hesitant smile playing on her lips. "Thank you?" Lincoln felt a warmth spread through him, the kind he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about helping Harper, it was about rebuilding something he had lost a long time ago. Trust. Connection. Meaning. As the weeks turned into months, Harper's business began to pick up, and her stress seemed to ease. She still worked at the restaurant part-time, but her focus shifted back to her passion, and Lincoln could see the difference it made. She looked lighter, happier, even as her pregnancy progressed. Lincoln didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Helping Harper wasn't just about making up for the past, it was about building something better, something real. And he was ready to see where it would take them. Lincoln stepped into the cozy boutique, the scent of fresh paint and polished wood greeting him as he crossed the threshold. The space was alive with color, fabric swatches draped over chairs, mood boards pinned to walls, and plants tucked into every corner. Harper's new design studio was small but brimming with personality, just like her. "Hey," she greeted him, glancing up from her desk where she was arranging tile samples. Her smile was cautious but genuine, a far cry from the guarded expression she'd worn when they first reconnected. "What brings you by?" "I was in the neighborhood," Lincoln replied, his tone casual, though he'd made the detour specifically to check in. "Wanted to see how things are going." She nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "Busy, which is a good problem to have. The new clients you mentioned came through, and they've been keeping me on my toes." Lincoln settled into a chair, glancing around the room. "It's amazing to see this place come together. I knew you'd make it work." Harper tilted her head, a hint of skepticism in her smile. "I'm still figuring things out. It's not exactly smooth sailing, but it's mine, and that makes it worth it." He admired her resilience, the quiet determination that had always been her strength. "If there's anything else you need, don't hesitate to ask." "I mean it. I know," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "And I appreciate it. I really do." Their conversations had grown easier over the weeks, the walls between them gradually coming down. Lincoln had taken care to tread lightly, respecting her independence while finding small ways to support her. He never pushed, never asked for more than she was willing to give, and that patience seemed to be paying off. They began spending more time together, not intentionally at first but in the natural rhythm of their shared connections. He'd stop by the studio occasionally, offering feedback on her projects, or just lending an ear when she needed to vent. Sometimes they'd grab a quick coffee, their conversations light and easy, filled with moments of laughter that reminded them both of simpler times. One evening, as they walked through a nearby park after closing up her studio, Lincoln broke the comfortable silence. "I've been thinking a lot about the past." Harper glanced at him, her expression curious but wary. "What about it?" "About us. About the ways I let you down," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "I was so focused on building my career that I lost sight of what really mattered. I took you for granted, and I'm sorry." She slowed her steps, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "You don't have to apologize, Lincoln. We both made mistakes." "I know," he said, stopping to face her. "But I should have listened to you more. You wanted something real, something I couldn't see at the time. I realize now how much I missed because I was too stubborn to stop and appreciate what we had." Harper looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "People change," she said finally, her tone thoughtful. "And I think you've changed too." Her words were simple, but they held a weight that struck Lincoln deeply. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm trying. And I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm here for you. For you and the baby." Harper's lips quirked into a smile, softer this time. "Thank you, Lincoln. That means a lot." As they continued walking, their conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the exchange stayed with both of them, a subtle but significant step forward. Inspired by Harper's passion for helping local artisans and small businesses, Lincoln began exploring ways he could use his own influence to make a difference. He reached out to his contacts in the city, proposing a series of initiatives aimed at supporting grassroots entrepreneurship. His company launched a grant program for emerging designers and hosted community events that showcased local talent. Harper was hesitant at first when he mentioned the projects to her, wary of being a focus of his efforts. "This isn't about me, is it?" she asked one evening as they sat in her studio, reviewing a proposal he'd drafted. "It's inspired by you," he clarified. "But it's not just about you. There's so much potential in this community, and I want to help foster that. You reminded me how important it is to invest in people, not just profits." She studied him for a long moment, her expression softening. "That's really amazing, Lincoln. I'm proud of you." The words hit him harder than he expected, filling him with a quiet warmth. He hadn't realized how much her opinion still mattered to him until now. "Thank you," he said simply. As the months passed, Harper's trust in Lincoln grew, and with it, a new kind of friendship blossomed between them. It wasn't the heady, all-consuming connection they'd shared in their early years, but something steadier, built on mutual respect and understanding. Lincoln cherished it, knowing how fragile it was and determined not to squander it. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in her studio, he helping to move furniture while she arranged a new display, Harper paused and looked at him. "You've really changed," she said, her tone a mix of surprise and admiration. Lincoln set down the chair he'd been carrying, brushing his hands off. "I had to. Losing you was a wake-up call I didn't know I needed." Harper smiled, a warmth in her expression that hadn't been there before. "Maybe some good came out of it after all." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to quiet around them. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't even a promise, but it was something, an acknowledgement of the progress they'd made and the possibilities that lay ahead. As they returned to their tasks, the air between them felt lighter, the bridge they'd been building growing stronger with every step they took together. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the first time in years, they both felt ready to face it, side by side. It was an ordinary afternoon when Lincoln's phone buzzed on his desk. He glanced at the screen, expecting another message from his assistant or a client, but instead, it was a call from an unfamiliar number. Something about it made his chest tighten. "Hello?" he answered, his voice cautious. "Lincoln, it's Lily," came the hurried reply. "Harper's been taken to the hospital. She went into labor early." She's asking for you. Lincoln's breath caught. Is she okay? What happened? She's stable, but they're monitoring her closely. The baby's coming sooner than expected, and she's scared. She didn't know who else to call. Lincoln was already on his feet, grabbing his keys and heading for the door. Which hospital? Lily told him, and he didn't waste another second. He called for his driver but couldn't wait, opting to drive himself. The city blurred past him, his focus narrowing to a single thought: Harper. When he arrived at the hospital, the antiseptic smell and muted chaos hit him all at once. He approached the front desk, his heart pounding in his chest. Harper Whitmore, he said, his voice strained. Where is she? The nurse directed him to the maternity ward, and he rushed down the sterile hallway, his polished shoes echoing off the floor. When he reached her room, he paused for a moment to collect himself before stepping inside. Harper was lying in the hospital bed, her face pale and damp with sweat. Her hair was a mess, sticking to her forehead, but her eyes were sharp, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She looked up when he entered, and relief softened her expression. You came, she said, her voice weak but steady. Of course I did, he said, crossing the room to stand by her side. I'm here. She reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly as another contraction gripped her. Lincoln felt a pang of helplessness watching her endure the pain, her body trembling with the effort. The baby's early, she said once the contraction passed, her voice trembling. They said it's not ideal, but we'll be okay, right? You will be, Lincoln said, his voice firm. You're the strongest person I know, Harper. You've got this. Her lips quirked into a faint smile, but her grip on his hand didn't loosen. For the first time, Lincoln saw her vulnerability laid bare, and it shook something loose in him. She wasn't just the woman he had once loved, she was a fighter, a survivor, and now, a soon-to-be mother. The hours dragged on, each contraction bringing Harper closer to delivery. Lincoln stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, and silently marveling at her strength. Nurses came and went, offering updates and adjusting monitors, but Lincoln barely noticed them. His entire world had shrunk to the woman in the bed and the life they were about to bring into the world. When the time finally came, the room transformed into a flurry of activity. Doctors and nurses worked quickly, their movements precise and efficient. Lincoln stood by Harper's side, his hand clasping hers as she pushed through the pain, her cries tearing through the sterile air. You're doing amazing, he told her, his voice steady despite the whirlwind around them. I'm right here. Harper didn't let go of his hand, even as her grip tightened to the point of pain. Lincoln welcomed it, wanting to share even a fraction of the burden she was carrying. Watching her fight for their baby, her baby, Lincoln felt something deep inside him shift. When the baby's first cry filled the room, time seemed to stop. The doctor held up a tiny, wriggling form, announcing, "It's a boy." Harper collapsed back against the bed, her face etched with exhaustion and relief. Lincoln glanced at her, his heart swelling with pride and something far deeper. When the nurse placed the baby in her arms, tears streamed down Harper's cheeks as she gazed at her son for the first time. "He's perfect," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Lincoln leaned over, his gaze fixed on the tiny bundle in her arms. The baby's face was scrunched up, his cries softening into whimpers as Harper held him close. "He is," Lincoln agreed, his throat tight. For a while, they simply existed in the moment, the chaos of the delivery room fading into the background. When the nurses finally took the baby to clean and swaddle him, Lincoln pulled a chair closer to Harper's bed, his hand resting lightly on hers. "You were incredible," he said softly. "I've never seen anything like that." Harper let out a tired laugh, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. "I didn't think I could do it. Not without you." Her words hung in the air, filling Lincoln with a mix of gratitude and longing. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "Harper," he began, his voice low, "there's something I need to say." She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment before continuing. Seeing you like this, watching you bring a new life into the world, it's made me realize how much I've been missing. You're incredible, Harper. You've always been incredible. And I think I've always loved you." Her eyes widened slightly, her lips parting in surprise. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he went on, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want you to know that I'm here. For you, for the baby, for whatever you need. I'll be whatever you want me to be, friend, co-parent, anything. The choice is yours." Harper stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Lincoln feared he'd said too much, that he'd pushed her away. But then her hand tightened around his, and a faint smile curved her lips. "Lincoln," she said softly, "you've changed. I can see it. And I think we can figure this out. Together." Relief and hope surged through him, his chest tightening with the weight of her words. He nodded, unable to speak, and simply held her hand as they sat in silence. The nurse returned with the baby, placing him gently in Harper's arms. Lincoln leaned closer, gazing at the tiny face that represented a new beginning, a second chance for all of them. In that moment, he knew he'd do whatever it took to be the man they both deserved. The next few weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and quiet moments filled with new life. Lincoln visited Harper and the baby, whom she named Henry, almost every day. He marveled at how quickly the tiny boy became the center of their world, how easily his presence made the cracks in their past feel smaller, more distant. Every coo, every stretch of his little arms seemed to stitch them together in ways Lincoln hadn't thought possible. Harper, too, seemed to be softening. Her initial wariness around Lincoln gave way to something gentler, more trusting. They had shared some difficult conversations since that night in the hospital, conversations that forced them to confront the mistakes of their past. But in every exchange, Lincoln saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a cautious willingness to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Lincoln sat on Harper's couch with Henry cradled in his arms. The baby had just fallen asleep, his tiny hand curled around Lincoln's finger, and the sight of him filled Lincoln with a quiet sense of awe. "You're a natural," Harper said softly, sitting down beside him with a cup of tea. Lincoln glanced at her, his expression warm. "I had a good teacher." She smiled, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer than usual. "Thank you for being here. For everything." "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "This is where I want to be." Harper looked down at her tea, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she admitted. "About the things we went through and the people we've become." "And?" Lincoln asked, his voice steady but tinged with anticipation. She met his gaze, her expression earnest. "I see how much you've changed, Lincoln. You've become someone who listens, who cares about more than just work. I think I want to see where this can go. If we can build something new." Lincoln's heart swelled with relief and joy, but he kept his response measured, not wanting to overwhelm her. "I'd like that. More than anything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of their shared history giving way to the possibilities of the future. Over the following months, Lincoln began to make changes in his life. He had spent years pouring every ounce of himself into Davis Industries, convinced that his worth was tied to his success. But now, with Henry's tiny fingers gripping his heart and Harper's cautious smiles filling his days, he saw things differently. At a board meeting one morning, Lincoln announced his decision to step back from the day-to-day operations of the company. He named his most trusted lieutenant as interim CEO, explaining that he wanted to focus on his personal life and pursue projects that aligned with his newfound values. His colleagues were stunned, but Lincoln felt nothing but clarity. For the first time in years, he wasn't running on autopilot. He was choosing to live intentionally, to prioritize what truly mattered. Lincoln's transition wasn't just professional, it was personal, too. He moved out of his sprawling penthouse and into a more modest home near Harper's neighborhood, making it easier to spend time with her and Henry. His days became filled with small joys, late-night feedings, afternoons in the park, and quiet evenings sharing stories with Harper while Henry dozed between them. Harper, in turn, began to trust him more deeply. She saw how committed he was, not just to Henry but to their fragile, growing relationship. They weren't rushing anything. They were rebuilding step by step, brick by careful brick. One crisp autumn afternoon, they hosted a small gathering at Harper's home to celebrate Henry's first 3 months. It wasn't extravagant, just a few close friends, a simple spread of food, and plenty of laughter filling the cozy space. Lily was there, of course, along with a few of Harper's clients who had become friends. Lincoln's assistant, Claire, even stopped by, bringing a handmade blanket for Henry that earned her a rare, genuine smile from Harper. Lincoln stood in the corner of the living room, watching the scene unfold. Harper was laughing with Lily near the kitchen, her face lit with happiness. Henry was being fussed over by Claire and one of Harper's clients, his tiny hands waving in the air. The room felt alive with warmth and love, and Lincoln realized he hadn't felt this content in years. Harper caught his eye across the room and smiled, a soft, knowing look that sent warmth flooding through him. He crossed the room to stand beside her, leaning against the counter as she finished her conversation with Lily. "This is nice," he said, his voice low. "It is," Harper agreed, glancing around the room. "It feels right." Lincoln nodded, his gaze settling on her. "Thank you for letting me be part of this. Of your life again." Harper turned to him fully, her expression serious but tender. "You've earned it, Lincoln. You've shown me that you're not the same man you were before. And I'm glad you're here." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of forgiveness, of hope. Lincoln reached for her hand, his touch light but firm. "I'll keep earning it every day." She squeezed his hand, her smile widening. "I know you will." As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Lincoln found himself alone in the living room, cradling a drowsy Henry. Harper appeared beside him, her presence warm and steady. "Looks like someone's ready for bed," she said, brushing a hand over Henry's soft hair. "Yeah," Lincoln replied, his voice soft. "He had a big day." Harper sat beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. They stayed like that for a while, the room quiet except for Henry's soft breaths. "I think we're going to be okay," Harper murmured, her voice filled with quiet conviction. Lincoln turned his head to kiss the top of her hair, his heart full. "I know we are." And in that moment, surrounded by love and second chances, Lincoln knew he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not success, not wealth, but a life filled with purpose, connection, and the people who mattered most. Lincoln's journey wasn't just about rekindling a lost love. It was about rediscovering what truly mattered. Through forgiveness, growth, and the courage to take a leap of faith, he and Harper found their way back to each other, not as the people they once were, but as stronger, wiser versions of themselves. Together, they built a life defined not by material success but by love, family, and the promise of second chances. As their story reminds us, it's never too late to change, to make amends, and to prioritize what truly matters. Whether it's repairing a relationship, chasing a dream, or simply being present for the people we care about, every step forward is an opportunity to create a new beginning.
The winter wind bit through her threadbare coat, but Sarah Donovan barely noticed. Strolling past neon-lit windows, she couldn't ignore the relentless ache in her belly, an ache caused by hunger and the 6-month child she carried. Shivering on the sidewalk, she glanced up at a massive TV screen, blaring the nightly financial news. There, beaming under the bright studio lights, was a man she once promised to love forever. William Donovan, her husband, a multimillionaire, famous, admired, while she trembled in the cold. Her heart twisted. How had their world turned so cruel? She had nothing, and he seemed to have it all. Sarah Donovan had known hunger before, but never like this. On that frigid evening, The wind seemed to slice through layers of her clothing directly into her bones. She pulled the sides of her coat together in a desperate attempt to keep warm. Through the swirling snowflakes, she could just make out the bright, flashing monitors in Times Square. On the largest screen, a familiar face, William Donovan, appeared. His name scrolled in large letters. Tech Investor of the Year. Applause thundered behind him in the recorded clip. Brightly lit, he was addressing a hall filled with wealth power and cameras from CNN, CNBC, and local networks. Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away. That face, the strong jaw, the slight smile that once reassured her everything would be all right. Now he looked polished, exuding confidence. She hadn't seen him in person for almost a year. Her chest clenched with memories of the day he walked out, arguments about money and ambition overshadowing their love. She'd tried to reason with him to support him, but each conversation ended in a new fight, culminating in the shocking decision he would succeed alone. The flickering billboard cut to a montage of images, William shaking hands with Mark Cuban at a tech conference, then introducing a pioneering piece of software in Silicon Valley. Sarah saw glimpses of glamorous parties William in a tailored tuxedo, accompanied by men and women she had never met. The talk show host concluded the segment by proclaiming, "William Donovan, America's newest business sensation." Then the screen blinked to a car commercial. Just like that, he vanished into the night. Sarah blinked back tears. There was a time William's arms had been her warm refuge, promising they'd face every storm side by side. And now, pregnant with his child, she walked alone on icy sidewalks, scrounging for a place to sleep. She was determined not to cry, but her emotions overwhelmed her as she gazed up at the ironically beautiful Christmas lights decorating the city. By all appearances, the world around her was celebrating, and she was surviving. Barely. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, feeling the slightest kick. "I'll take care of you," she whispered to the life inside her. It was a promise she intended to keep, though at that moment she wasn't sure how. When she turned away from the screen and stumbled onward, her foot snagged on a piece of broken pavement. A stinging pain shot through her ankle, and she nearly collapsed. She bit down a cry, scanning the crowd for help, but passers-by, preoccupied with their own rush of errands and holiday shopping, scarcely gave her a glance. That's what life had become after she left the small studio in which she and William once lived, alone, invisible. Sarah's pride was bruised, but she refused to crumble. She passed by a bakery. Through the window, the smell of fresh bread made her stomach twist. She had to preserve her last dollar for the cheapest motel, a place with peeling wallpaper and barely functioning plumbing, but at least it was indoors. She stepped inside, bought a small roll and devoured it in 3 bites. Outside again, the wind roared, intensifying the city's clamor. Still clutching her abdomen, she decided that tomorrow everything had to change. She would find a job. She'd scour the city for help. She would not let her child enter this world with nothing but sorrow. But for tonight, she needed a place to rest, a place that wasn't some abandoned corner or shadowed alley. Even if it cost her last few dollars, she had to prioritize the safety of the life inside her. As Sarah walked away from the mesmerizing screens of Times Square, one thought pulsed in her mind. Her husband, the man she had once loved beyond reason, was thriving. And here she was, pregnant and alone. Could the chasm between them grow any wider? Long before he was the darling of business magazines and tech summits, William Donovan was a daydreamer writing code in the corner of the local university library. Sarah remembered the first time she saw him. It was her sophomore year, and she was majoring in English literature at Columbia. The library's back table had been her favorite spot, quiet, perfect for reading. She noticed him a junior in computer science, leaning over a laptop with an exasperated scowl. Curious and drawn by the intellectual frenzy in his eyes, she'd asked, "Need any help?" Although Sarah barely understood advanced programming, the question sparked the first real conversation they ever had. William's exhausted face broke into the shyest of smiles, and she recalled thinking, "He's kind of cute under all that stress." They chatted about his class project, an algorithm for data compression. Sarah confessed she was more comfortable discussing Shakespeare than software, and he teased her gently. From that moment on, they were a constant presence in each other's lives. Their connection seemed effortless. He awakened her interest in technology's potential. She introduced him to literary classics, weaving in metaphors about love and ambition. They started dating by Christmas break of that year. With sweet, simple moments, late-night walks around campus, scrounging for cheap coffee in the student lounge, trying out new ramen spots around Manhattan. They were two dreamers, William longing to found a tech startup that would revolutionize how people shared data, and Sarah hoping to become a novelist. The future seemed limitless. She could still feel the way he used to grasp her hand whenever she doubted herself, as if to say, "We'll get through anything." Yet as graduation approached, financial stresses haunted them. William, determined to compete in the tech world, pitched his software to small investors, but faced constant rejection. Sarah, meanwhile, struggled to get traction for her short stories, or even land a decent internship. Their families offered little financial support. William's parents, proud owners of a modest real estate business in upstate New York, expected him to follow a more traditional path and often expressed skepticism toward his entrepreneurial obsession. Sarah's mother, whose chronic illness drained the family's savings, couldn't help beyond a few encouraging phone calls. When they got married in a humble civil ceremony right after graduation, they were brimming with hope. Their honeymoon was a short weekend, spent in a budget motel near Niagara Falls, the only getaway they could afford. But they didn't care. What mattered was their shared devotion. They returned to New York City, renting a cheap studio apartment in Queens. William coded into the late hours, while Sarah worked as a barista by day and scribbled short stories by night. Their love burned like a bright flame until cracks began to form. William became consumed with success, obsessed, really. Each failed pitch to an investor sent him into a silent downward spiral that led to outbursts. Sarah tried to reassure him that failure was part of the journey, but her optimism only irritated him. As months dragged on, the bills piled up. William grew desperate, dabbling in risky deals with shady angel investors. They had endless arguments about money. When success finally arrived nearly 2 years into their marriage, with a major investor, Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, buying into William's new software idea, Sarah hoped that would ease the tension. But ironically, it only magnified their differences. William was suddenly thrust into corporate meetings, traveling across the country, networking with high-profile entrepreneurs. Invitations to flashy events replaced their quiet dinners. He no longer came home with cheap takeout. He was gone most nights, presumably in boardrooms or at fancy parties. Sarah felt him slipping away. A year passed in that swirl of success, and Sarah was left behind, often alone, in their now upscale condo near Central Park. William's time was devoured by business calls and conferences on the West Coast. When he was home, he was distracted, fidgety, unwilling to share stories of his day. She remembered their final argument vividly. She'd asked him to spend one evening with her to reconnect. He retorted that she had no clue how hard he worked to keep them afloat, how she should be more grateful. That night ended with William storming out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. He never came back. Days became weeks. Sarah's calls and texts went unanswered. Soon bank notices arrived explaining how William had switched all joint accounts to his name alone. Sarah had no income. Worse yet, 2 months later, she discovered she was pregnant. Fear overrode any bitterness, but desperation set in. Rent soared, her barista job didn't pay enough, and she could no longer afford the condo. Before long, she was forced onto the street. She tried contacting William's PR office, but the line always went to a polite assistant who left her on hold until she hung up in frustration. Now, witnessing his face on the giant screen in Times Square, that entire whirlwind of a past threatened to engulf her. She reminded herself of one vow she'd made, standing in that battered apartment with an eviction notice in hand. I will survive and protect this child. If the father refused to care, she would find a way. She would not become just another nameless tragedy in the city's underbelly. Morning brought little relief from the cold. Sarah woke on a narrow, squeaky bed in the cheapest motel she could find. The heater rattled uselessly, barely keeping the air above freezing. She had about $15 left, enough for a couple of cheap sandwiches, maybe bus fare if she wanted to head to the next shelter. But Sarah was stubborn. She believed there had to be something better. She packed her meager belongings, a change of clothes, her worn copy of Emily Dickinson's poems, a phone with a cracked screen that almost never picked up a signal. Everything fit into a single bag. Every step outside felt like walking through a wind tunnel. She knew she had to find help soon. A pregnant woman living on the streets was a tragedy waiting to happen. She headed to the nearest public library, an older building with classical columns, seeking warmth and free internet to look for job openings. Inside, near the community bulletin board, she found a flyer advertising a free women's shelter in Brooklyn. It promised hot meals counseling and prenatal support. She tore off the address tab. This might be my best chance, she thought, shoulders relaxing slightly for the first time in days. She hopped on a bus, ignoring the pitying looks from a couple of other passengers. Upon arrival, she found the shelter nestled in a quiet neighborhood. The building was large, with peeling paint and sagging steps, but the warmth she felt when she walked inside was immediate and comforting. A friendly volunteer named Rebecca greeted her with a kind smile. After scribbling her name on a form, Sarah was shown to a cramped but clean room shared with 3 other women. Each cot had fresh blankets and a small side table. Meals are served at 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening, Rebecca explained. We also have prenatal checkups every Friday with a visiting nurse from Bellevue Hospital. Sarah nearly cried with relief. A medical checkup was a blessing. She hadn't seen a doctor since learning of her pregnancy. Rebecca chatted with her for a while, asking about her situation. Though Sarah felt hesitant to reveal too much, there was something about Rebecca's gentle nature that encouraged honesty. She admitted her husband had left, that he was well off, and that she had nowhere else to go. Rebecca listened, never judging, then simply patted Sarah's shoulder. You'll be safe here. You'll get back on your feet. I'm here if you need anything, Rebecca offered. Those words of encouragement did more for Sarah's spirit than anything had in months. That first night in the shelter, Sarah lay in the dark, hearing the muffled snores of her roommates. She felt a faint flutter within her baby moving. I'm not alone, she reminded herself. This life inside her gave her purpose. She recalled an old Emily Dickinson line. She loved something about hope being a thing with feathers. That hope had perched in her soul, refusing to abandon her even in life's darkest corners. The next morning she joined the breakfast queue. The food wasn't luxurious oatmeal, a banana-powdered orange juice, but it was warm and nourishing. Some of the residents eyed her suspiciously. They were all at different points in life's struggles, yet in their gazes, Sarah sensed a silent camaraderie that had been missing in her life for so long. As she sat down to eat, Rebecca joined her. "We have a job support program," Rebecca said, her voice quiet. "You'd get help writing a resume, searching for openings, maybe training. I know it can be tough to find something with no stable address, but we can try." Sarah nodded eagerly. "That would be great," she replied, swallowing a surge of gratitude. She was ready to do anything office cleaning retail, anything that would help her earn enough for a deposit on a small apartment. But as she scrolled through job listings later that day, a rerun of a business show played on the shelter's TV in the lounge. They were discussing William Donovan again. A celebrity investor, Mark Cuban, had praised William's entrepreneurial drive, suggesting he was the future of American tech. Hearing the news anchor casually mention her husband's name felt like a punch to the gut. He was more successful than she'd even imagined. She took a deep breath, forced herself to look away from the screen and told herself, "This is my life now, and I'm not giving up." She wasn't sure if she hated him, missed him, or simply wished none of this had happened. All she knew was that she had to survive, and she would on her own terms. At precisely 9 in the morning the following Friday, Sarah waited in a makeshift exam room set up in the shelter's converted rec hall. Worn curtains partitioned the space. The volunteer nurse, Ms. Francis, bustled in, setting down a bag of medical supplies. She was a short, no-nonsense woman with bright, reassuring eyes. "How are you feeling, dear?" Ms. Francis asked, washing her hands and snapping on latex gloves. Sarah hesitated. She had been ignoring the dull ache in her lower back, the bouts of nausea that still came and went, and the constant exhaustion. "Better now that I have a safe place to sleep," she admitted. Ms. Francis nodded, taking Sarah's vitals, measuring her belly, and listening carefully with a Doppler for the baby's heartbeat. The rhythmic whoosh-whoosh filled the air, and Sarah's eyes grew misty. This was the first time she'd heard her child's heartbeat. So strong, she thought, pressing a hand to her mouth. "No major concerns right now?" Ms. Francis informed, giving a small smile. "But you need to be mindful of your diet. Get as much protein and healthy foods as you can. And rest. Stress can harm the baby too." Sarah almost laughed bitterly. Stress was the only thing she had in abundance. But she forced a bright nod. Ms. Francis noted that Sarah would need a formal medical file at a hospital soon in case of early labor or complications. "We'll coordinate that," Ms. Francis added. "In the meantime, do you have any support person for prenatal care? A family member or—" her voice trailed. "My husband's not around," Sarah said, swallowing a lump in her throat. "No other family in the city." The nurse's expression turned sympathetic. "Well, you're not alone. We're here to help." After the checkup, Sarah felt slightly more confident. The baby was healthy. That knowledge was the anchor she clung to. She spent her afternoons in the job support program, brushing up her typing skills, practicing interview responses with a counselor named Janet. Her English degree helped. She applied for positions as a receptionist, an editorial assistant, or even a part-time tutor. Most responses came back negative. Employers didn't want someone with an unstable address, or they required advanced certifications. But Sarah persevered. Days turned into weeks. The bulge in her belly became more pronounced, and so did the heaviness in her heart. She tried to keep track of the outside world, scanning newspapers in the library, for job ads, occasionally glimpsing headlines about William Donovan's skyrocketing success. One day the paper featured a photograph of him leaving a high-end restaurant with a tall, elegant woman wearing designer clothes. The photo caption labeled her as Madeline Ashford, potential new business partner. Sarah's throat tightened. She glanced at her own reflection in the library window. Rumpled coat eyes ringed with fatigue. If William had moved on personally, was she even a memory? That evening her back pains grew sharper, and she realized with dread that her pregnancy was entering a stage where she would soon need consistent medical care. She couldn't keep skipping checkups or rely solely on the shelter nurse. She also worried about finances, diapers, baby clothes, a crib. Where would she get them? She'd joined a waiting list for government assistance, but bureaucracy moved at a snail's pace. Sarah found herself weeping some nights, the future an ominous shadow. Yet each morning she recalled the baby's heartbeat, reminding herself there was no choice but forward. One particularly cold day, she forced herself to walk 3 miles in the slushy streets to follow up on a potential receptionist position. She arrived soaked and shivering. Her hopes rose when the manager, a kindly older woman, offered a temporary role answering phones at a small publishing company. The pay was minimal, but it was something. She'd start Monday. Sarah left the office hugging a folder of paperwork and feeling a glimmer of pride. I'm making progress. When she returned to the shelter, though, she found Rebecca pale-faced in the hallway. We need to talk, Rebecca said quietly, leading Sarah to a corner. Apparently an acquaintance of Sarah's had come by looking for her, a man with slicked-back hair and an expensive suit. He left a business card that read, Donovan Enterprises. Sarah's heart hammered. She stared at the card, the swirling black and gold letters. Did he say anything she managed to ask? Just that he needed to speak with you regarding a personal matter. Sarah's mind whirled. Could it be William's lawyer? One of his personal aides? Did William know she was pregnant? She never thought he would actually search for her. A swirl of anger, fear, and a strange residual hope filled her. She resolved to call the number. Maybe it was finally time for a confrontation, a reckoning. She just didn't know what to expect. Sarah picked up a battered pay-as-you-go phone, a small victory from the shelter's resource program, and stared at the business card. It bore a name, Charles Whitmore, Legal Counsel. She dialed with trembling fingers, listening to the ring on the other end. Anxiety swelled. Finally, a crisp male voice answered. Charles Whitmore speaking. This is Sarah Donovan. You left your card at the shelter. Her voice sounded small. He cleared his throat. Ah, Mrs. Donovan. I'm glad you reached out. Mr. Donovan, your husband would like to set up a meeting. It's in regard to finances and certain changes to his estate. A chill ran down her spine. Was this about a divorce? She almost panicked at the thought, but she maintained composure. Why now? She asked. The question came out bitterly. Ma'am, I only have instructions to coordinate your meeting. Could you come by the Donovan Enterprises office downtown on 5th Avenue? Sarah hesitated. I can't. Not immediately. She had a job orientation. Soon she had no decent clothes and no money for a taxi. Shall we say, next Tuesday at noon, he pressed. We'd be happy to reimburse your transportation. Mr. Donovan understands how difficult the city can be. He specifically requested you meet in a neutral setting. Sarah's anger flared at the paternalistic tone. But caution prevailed. All right. Tuesday. She hung up, heart thudding. William wants to meet. Part of her raged that he would drag her into some legal affair after all this time. Another part, small yet insistent, felt relief that maybe he would acknowledge their baby. Maybe do the right thing. And at least provide child support. Tuesday came quickly, and Sarah found herself rummaging through the shelter's donated clothing closet, picking out a modest black dress and a coat that fit snugly over her belly. Rebecca offered to do her hair in a simple bun. As she left, 6 women in the shelter wished her luck, though they knew only that she was meeting her ex. The Donovan Enterprises office towered over Fifth Avenue with mirrored glass windows. Sarah approached it anxiously, ignoring the doorman's raised eyebrow when she walked in. The marble-floored lobby gleamed, and well-dressed professionals hurried past, exuding an air of wealth. A statue of William's trademark D logo was on display near the elevators, a testament to his success. Charles Whitmore, a tall, slim man with graying hair, emerged from behind the reception area and greeted her with a polite bow. "Mrs. Donovan." "Right this way," he said, leading her to a plush conference room overlooking the city skyline. Soft leather chairs, a polished mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Central Park. Everything screamed opulence. She perched on a chair, feeling out of place. Moments later, the door opened. In walked William Donovan. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and stepped forward with a hesitant smile. Sarah's throat constricted at the sight of him. He looked the same, yet different, older, more confident. She stood instinctively, placing a protective hand on her abdomen. If he noticed her rounded belly, he didn't show any immediate reaction. "Sarah," he said quietly, as though testing the word. He paused, his eyes flicking to her stomach, then back to her face. "Thank you for coming. I didn't realize you were, are you?" She inhaled sharply. "Pregnant," she finished. "Yes. For nearly 6 months." A fleeting expression of shock, maybe guilt, flashed in his eyes. "I didn't know," he said. You didn't tell me." Anger boiled in her. "I tried. You cut all contact. You walked out. And..." Her voice trembled. She clenched her fists. "You were too busy with your empire to pick up the phone." He exhaled, looking pained. "I'm sorry. I truly am." He sank into the chair opposite her, rubbing his temples. "I messed up. I realize that now. I've been going through a lot, but it's no excuse." She eyed him warily, uncertain if this was genuine remorse or a performance. "So why am I here?" "Did you need me to sign divorce papers? Is that it?" William shook his head vigorously. No. That's not it at all." He looked at Charles, who stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Donovan asked me to assist in drafting an arrangement to provide you with financial support, enough to cover all prenatal care, childbirth expenses, and living costs. In addition, there's a trust fund he'd like to establish for the child." Sarah felt a wave of conflicting emotions, relief that there was some practical solution, indignation that he thought money alone could fix everything, and a flicker of hope. "What about us?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Our marriage?" William gazed at her, eyes clouded. "I want to help you. And our child. I know I can't change the past, but I can at least do right by you now." He hesitated, swallowing hard. "As for us, Sarah, I can't pretend I haven't caused terrible damage. I don't expect you to forgive me instantly." But maybe with time, she wasn't sure how to respond. It felt like they were strangers. She realized she was trembling. He's acknowledging the child, she told herself. That was step one. Charles laid out documents referencing monthly allowances coverage for medical bills, etc. The amounts were staggering. Sarah had never seen such figures. She could live comfortably, rent an apartment, and never worry about basic needs again. But guilt gnawed at her. Should she accept this? She eyed William, her voice wavering. "Why now?" she asked. "Why not?" Before William's face was taut. "When I saw you disappeared from our condo and heard rumors you were struggling, I tried to locate you, but I was overwhelmed with expansions, new deals, then the pandemic of responsibilities. I kept putting it off." He inhaled, pained. "That was wrong. I realized I couldn't move forward, knowing you might be suffering. You deserved better." "Damn right I did," Sarah muttered, tears burning her eyes. She glanced at the legal documents. They were a band-aid solution. Maybe it was an answer for the baby. Yet a single question lingered. Could William Donovan possibly be part of my life again? She didn't sign anything that day, telling Charles she needed time to think. William offered to call her a car, but she declined, wanting to walk back to the shelter to clear her head. He handed her a card with his personal cell number, the only item that felt remotely intimate. She left the grand building uncertain whether she was stepping toward salvation or heartbreak. That evening, Sarah returned to the shelter in a daze. She found Rebecca in the kitchen, dishing out bowls of soup to the residents. Feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her, Sarah pulled Rebecca aside and recounted the surreal encounter with William Donovan. She showed her the paperwork, baffling sums of money that could turn her life around. "That's... wow," Rebecca breathed, flipping through the pages. "I've never seen so many zeros on a support agreement." She paused. "So what are you going to do?" Sarah sighed, sinking into a chair. "I don't know. Part of me feels like taking this money is the only logical choice. The baby deserves a stable life, not a mother stuck in a shelter. But another part," she rubbed her belly. "I'm scared he's just trying to buy off his conscience. If I sign, do I lose my dignity?" Rebecca placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "It's not about dignity, Sarah. It's about providing for your child and yourself. You've sacrificed so much. You deserve some security. That doesn't mean you have to let him back in your life unless you want to." Those words calmed Sarah slightly, but her mind remained unsettled. She recalled her once blazing love with William, how they'd giggle over cheap pizza late at night, how she'd fallen asleep on his shoulder while he read his code aloud. Is that man still in there, beneath the polished millionaire facade, she wondered. A part of her yearned for closure or even a chance at reconciliation. But the hurt was fresh, the betrayal still raw. The baby's well-being, however, was paramount. That same night, she carefully reviewed the documents, scribbling notes and questions in the margins, wanting to ensure she wasn't signing away any rights inadvertently. If William was sincere in his remorse, maybe she could start by accepting financial support, then see if anything else could be salvaged later. She set the papers aside, resolved to meet with Charles again in a few days. Meanwhile, Sarah's new part-time receptionist job started. She commuted by bus, then hopped the subway to a modest building in Midtown, stepping into the small publishing house. The environment was busy, yet casual stacks of manuscripts, coffee mugs on every desk, editors arguing about grammar. On her first day, she answered phones, directed visitors, and fetched coffee for staff meetings. By lunchtime, she was exhausted, but a gentle wave of triumph swelled inside her. "I'm working. I'm making strides." During a brief break, she scrolled her phone and saw a new message from William. "Please let me know if you have any questions about the agreement. Also, I hope you're doing well." That was all. So formal, yet tinged with a cautious warmth. Sarah stared at the screen, unsure how to reply, eventually typing a short, "I'm still thinking. I'm safe. Thanks." She pressed send. Her heart hammered, but she forced herself to focus on her tasks. Over the following week, she gradually came to a decision. She agreed to sign the financial support arrangement, but made it clear to Charles Whitmore in an email that she didn't want William controlling her life. She insisted on having her own apartment in her own name, a modest but comfortable place near the shelter, so she could remain in the supportive environment until she felt truly stable. She also wanted the freedom to make medical and personal decisions for the baby. If William truly wanted to be involved, they could discuss visitation and co-parenting later. To her astonishment, William agreed to all of it, no arguments. He forwarded a preliminary lease for a small 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, the rent fully paid for a year. Sarah felt a surge of relief. He's taking responsibility, she thought. Maybe there was a shred of the old William left. But was she ready for more than just a transactional arrangement? Late one night, cradling the phone, she impulsively dialed his personal number. He picked up immediately, sounding anxious. "Sarah." She swallowed. "I just wanted to say thank you," she managed, "for the help." Silence filled the line, then a soft exhale. "Of course. It's the least I can do." Her voice trembled. "This baby, William, it's ours. He or she deserves 2 parents who at least respect each other." He murmured, "I'd like that. I'd like to earn your respect again. And maybe one day, your forgiveness." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She remembered how once, years ago, they could share entire nights, simply talking, dreaming. She had so many questions for him, why he abandoned her, what truly motivated his success, whether there was any love left. But for now, she whispered, "Good night, William," and ended the call. By the time Sarah was entering her 7th month of pregnancy, her life looked drastically different. With William's financial support, she moved into the small but cozy apartment. The walls were painted a cheerful cream color, and there was an extra room she planned to turn into a nursery. The furniture was minimal, just a sofa, a bed, and a kitchen table, but it was hers. Her name was on the lease. Her job at the publishing house had also become slightly more secure. The manager recognized her punctuality and diligence. They offered her an extended contract for another 3 months. With the baby coming, Sarah wasn't sure how long she could keep working, but at least she had some sense of purpose each day. She'd found a routine that made her feel human again. Wake up, check on emails, go to work, come home. Set aside half an hour to jot down story ideas and then rest. She still visited the shelter occasionally, volunteering to help with new arrivals, offering them a spark of hope in the same way Rebecca had done for her. One chilly afternoon, Sarah heard a knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find William standing there, holding a small bouquet of lilies and a bag of groceries. Her heart pounded as she took in his hesitant smile. "I was in the neighborhood," he explained. "Thought I'd stop by, if that's okay." Sarah hesitated. She hadn't told him her exact address. Charles must have. She had been careful with boundaries, not wanting to feel controlled. But she found herself nodding, stepping aside to let him in. He handed her the flowers, which she placed in a vase on the kitchen table. I brought some things, he said, lifting the grocery bag. Fresh fruit, vitamins, and a new jacket for you. The weather's getting colder. The gesture caught her off guard. Thank you, she managed, smoothing her hand over her growing belly. His eyes flicked to the apartment, taking in the bare walls and modest furnishings. It's nice, cozy, he remarked, trying to fill the silence. He glanced at her abdomen again, then back at her face. May I ask, do you know the baby's gender? She shook her head. I want it to be a surprise, she said softly. That's wonderful. William looked down, fiddling with the bag. Finally, he exhaled. Sarah, I know showing up like this might be too forward. I'm trying to respect your space, but I'd also like to be more involved. I want to help with the doctor appointments, the nursery. Anything you need. She studied him, noticing a sincerity in his gaze that hadn't been there during their last tumultuous months together. Why the sudden change, she asked. She recalled the humiliating nights she spent on the streets, clinging to her coat for warmth, while he mingled with venture capitalists. William's shoulders sagged. When I left, I was consumed by my ambition, believing I couldn't handle a relationship. I was terrified of failing. I did fail you in the worst way. Then once success arrived, I felt emptier than ever. All I had was money, status, and a hollow sense of accomplishment. He paused, voice raw. I realize now that none of it matters, without love, without people who truly care about you. I guess I'm trying to atone for that. I can't change the past, but I can try to be here now. Tears prickled Sarah's eyes. The sincerity in his voice shook her. I appreciate the honesty, she said slowly. She wondered if it was real or if guilt simply propelled him now that she was visibly pregnant and vulnerable. Yet a part of her, the part that remembered how they'd once dreamed side by side, wanted to believe him. Would you like some tea? She offered, gesturing to the kettle on the stove. He nodded gratefully. The two of them settled at the tiny kitchen table, sipping tea amidst the silence. The city traffic hummed outside. Neither knew how to pick up the pieces of a shattered marriage in one afternoon, but at least they were there, trying. After a while, William cleared his throat. I'd like to take you to your next prenatal appointment, he said. If you'll let me. I can drive or we can get a car. Whatever you prefer. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. That would be nice. Deep down, a small flicker of warmth lit her heart, something akin to hope. William accompanied Sarah to her next prenatal appointment at Bellevue Hospital. Ms. Francis, the shelter nurse who volunteered there, greeted them warmly, but Sarah noticed the curious glances from staff members. She imagined they recognized William. His face was plastered across business headlines. Yet to his credit, he didn't flaunt his status. He simply held Sarah's coat while she changed into a gown and asked the doctor thoughtful questions about the baby's development. They heard the baby's heartbeat again, steady and reassuring. William's expression softened, and Sarah saw tears in his eyes. A powerful wave of emotion struck her. It was the first tangible moment she realized he truly cared about the child. On their way out, he placed a gentle hand on her back, guiding her through the bustling hallway. She allowed the small gesture, longing for closeness, yet keeping her guard up. In the hospital lobby, they unexpectedly bumped into a familiar face, Barbara Donovan Williams' mother. Her short silver hair was styled elegantly, and she wore a designer coat. She froze upon spotting her son with Sarah. William, she exclaimed. Then her gaze flicked to Sarah's round belly, and her eyes narrowed. I heard rumors, but I thought you two were done. Sarah instinctively braced herself. She recalled the tension with her mother-in-law, who never quite warmed to her. Barbara had always found subtle ways to criticize Sarah's family background and modest means. She also blamed Sarah for distracting William from more important ambitions. William squared his shoulders. "Mother, this is Sarah. My wife. She's pregnant with our child." Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line. "So you're reconciling?" she asked, voice laced with disapproval. Sarah couldn't hold back. "I wouldn't call it that," she said quietly. "We're trying to figure things out, at least for the baby's sake." Barbara sniffed disdainfully. "William, you have far too many responsibilities to let old mistakes drag you down." She eyed Sarah as if she were an intruder. "Why didn't you tell him you were pregnant sooner?" A flame of anger rose in Sarah. "I tried. He left, and I had no way to reach him. And trust me, I wouldn't call carrying your grandchild a mistake." William gently took his mother's arm. "Enough, Mother. The baby is my responsibility, and I won't have you speak to Sarah that way. We're not discussing this here in a hospital lobby." Barbara sniffed again. "We'll talk later, William." She glared at Sarah with thinly veiled contempt, then turned on her heel and walked away. Heart-pounding, Sarah noticed people staring. She blinked back tears, humiliated by the confrontation. William's jaw was tight. "I'm sorry." "She had no right to talk to you like that," he said softly. But Sarah's mind raced. She recalled how Barbara had once told her she wasn't good enough for William, that he needed a partner more on his level. Now wealthy and successful, William's family clearly saw Sarah as an obstacle. "It's fine," she muttered, though her trembling hands said otherwise. "I'll manage." They walked outside, the crisp air hitting their faces. William turned to her. "Please don't let her get to you. She doesn't speak for me." Sarah found her resolve. "I won't. But if we're going to co-parent, I need to know you'll stand by me, not be swayed by your mother's opinions." He nodded, eyes earnest. "I promise." Though his promise felt genuine, Sarah couldn't ignore the chill left by the confrontation. She remembered the nights when William's mother belittled her for dreaming of being a writer, for lacking financial security. Would that negativity poison their child's life too? Or had William grown enough to shield his new family from it? Only time would tell. On the drive back to Sarah's apartment, the tension was palpable. William tried to make small talk about the baby's due date, about nursery decor. But Sarah was lost in her thoughts. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he admitted quietly, "My mother was always controlling. Part of why I left was because I felt suffocated by her expectations, by the pressure of success. I let that overshadow you and me. I'm sorry." Sarah clutched her seatbelt. "What's done is done," she said, voice steady. "Let's just focus on the future, on doing right by this baby. That's all that matters." Inside, though, her emotions churned. Could we really have a future together, she wondered? Or is it just going to be co-parenting with a man I once loved? At her apartment, he walked her to the door. "Call me if you need anything," he said softly. She nodded, uncertain if she'd ever be ready to let him fully back into her life. The final weeks of Sarah's pregnancy arrived with a swirl of conflicting emotions. Her belly felt enormous, every movement an effort. Sleep eluded her, replaced by a blend of excitement and anxiety about the impending birth. William visited regularly, bringing supplies, maternity clothes, organic food, baby items. They spoke about practicalities, pediatricians' childcare options possible names, yet the question of their relationship remained unresolved. At times, they fell into an unexpected closeness, sharing a laugh at a tiny onesie with silly prints reminiscing about their college days. In those moments, Sarah glimpsed the man she fell in love with, his eyes warm and tender. But the memory of abandonment always lurked. She couldn't easily forget sleeping on sidewalks, shivering in the winter cold, all while he soared to stardom. Trust would not be rebuilt overnight. One evening she typed away at a short story, her old passion for writing rekindling, when a gentle knock came at the door. She opened it to find William in casual clothes holding a large container of homemade soup. "You mentioned in passing that you craved chicken soup," he said, smiling sheepishly. "I asked my personal chef to make a batch." "Don't worry, I didn't cook it myself. That would be disastrous." Sarah's laughter slipped out before she could stop it. "Thank you. That's thoughtful." He set the container down, noticing her manuscript drafts scattered across the table. "Are you writing again?" She blushed, nodding. "Just trying to get the creative juices flowing. Something for me, you know, to find myself again." He asked if he could read a snippet. She hesitated, then allowed him. He read quietly, eyes darting across the page. When he finished, he looked up, an admiring expression on his face. "This is really good," he said softly. "I forgot how talented you are." She swallowed, her heart fluttering. He was praising her, not dismissing her efforts as frivolous, like he once had. "Thank you," she whispered. They talked about the story about a lone traveler who finds hope in unexpected places. The conversation flowed naturally, reminiscent of their younger selves. At one point, he gently placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. A shared smile passed between them, something both tender and uncertain. Later that night, as he left, she lingered at the door. "William," she said softly, "I just want you to know. I see you trying. I appreciate it." He exhaled, relief washing over his face. "I'll keep trying, Sarah." But the next day, chaos returned. William called her in a panic, asking her to watch the news. Another business scandal had broken out, accusations that Donovan Enterprises engaged in questionable stock trading. Rumors swirled that William's mother, Barbara, had been pulling strings behind the scenes, orchestrating backdoor deals. William's name was splashed across headlines with tabloids, speculating about the moral integrity of his entire operation. Sarah flipped on her old TV set, seeing reporters swarm in front of Donovan Enterprises. A few sensationalist channels displayed a picture of Sarah from months ago, claiming she was the estranged wife carrying the heir to a troubled empire. She felt nauseous. Was she about to be dragged into the public eye? William texted, "I'm sorry. This is out of control. I never wanted you to be involved." She fought the urge to panic, but the stress weighed heavily, and within hours, mild contractions started. She was only 36 weeks along, a bit early, but still within a safe range. The contractions weren't severe yet, but she felt them enough to know her body might be preparing for labor. She called Miss Francis, who advised her to rest and hydrate, warning her to come to the hospital if things intensified. Night descended, and the tabloids kept spewing stories. A photo of Barbara, stern-faced, refused to speak to reporters. They insinuated that William's entire fortune could be at risk. Sarah tried not to care about money, but she worried about the baby. If Donovan Enterprises collapsed under scandal, would her child be caught in the crossfire of a messy public fiasco? When William arrived at her apartment, he looked drained, like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm sorry for the media circus," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I had no idea my mother was involved in shady trades. I've fired the people responsible, but the damage is done." Sarah tried to remain calm, but the Braxton Hicks contractions flared, causing her to wince. William noticed immediately fear flashing across his features. "Are you okay? I think—" She paused, breathing through the discomfort. "I might be in early labor." His face paled, and in that moment, all talk of scandal and business melted away. "Let's get you to the hospital," he said gently, helping her gather her things. As they hurried out, Sarah realized a new chapter was beginning. Whatever storms raged outside, she was about to bring a child into the world, and she needed William's unwavering support. Inside the maternity wing at Bellevue Hospital, time seemed to slip into a blur of fluorescent lights, medical chatter, and waves of pain. Sarah was admitted with mild contractions that by midnight turned fierce. William stayed by her side, gripping her hand through each surge. Sweating and trembling, Sarah alternated between tears and focused breathing, clinging to the promise that soon she'd hold her baby. It was a tumultuous night. At one point, the baby's heart rate dipped slightly, prompting quick action from the medical staff. Fear stabbed through Sarah. She locked eyes with William, seeing raw terror reflected there. In that moment, all bitterness faded, replaced by the realization that they both desperately wanted their child to be safe. The baby's heartbeat stabilized, and relief flowed. Hours crawled by. Finally, near dawn, Sarah felt the overwhelming urge to push. Nurses coached her, encouraging her to bear down. She felt like every muscle in her body was on fire. William murmured supportive words, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. With a final guttural cry, she felt the release of pain and the sudden miraculous wail of new life. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, squirming newborn. A rush of emotions seized Sarah. Love, relief, awe. She reached out trembling arms as they placed the baby on her chest. Shocked by the warmth of that tiny body, tears streamed down Sarah's face. William's eyes glistened too, a rare vulnerability she'd never seen in him before. "Welcome to the world," Sarah whispered, voice choked, pressing a kiss to the baby's wet forehead. The little girl quieted, opening her eyes for a brief second, as if trying to focus on her mother's face. Later they moved Sarah to a recovery room. William remained close, pacing the hallway, on calls to his legal team, but always returning to check on Sarah and the baby. He smiled whenever he saw them together, as though the world outside, with all its scandal and drama, had lost its power here. Barbara tried to visit, but Sarah requested only William and the medical staff be allowed in. She wasn't ready to confront her mother-in-law. Not yet. Meanwhile, word arrived that the scandal at Donovan Enterprises was being resolved. William had stepped forward, taking responsibility for corporate oversight lapses and cooperating with regulators. He was determined to repair the damage rather than hide. 2 days passed in the hospital, a whirlwind of feeding diaper changes and exhausted naps. Sarah watched William hold their daughter, marveling at how gently he cradled her. They hadn't formally picked a name. Sarah had 6 favorites. While gazing into her daughter's round, curious eyes, she decided on Hope. It felt fitting. This tiny baby was the embodiment of new beginnings. When discharge day came, William insisted on driving them to Sarah's apartment. He carefully carried the car seat, setting it up by the living room couch. Sarah gently unbuckled Hope, lifting her close. For a moment, they stood together in the quiet apartment, the hush broken only by soft baby sighs. "I want to make a pledge," William said, voice low. to be here for you and Hope, always. I know I can't erase the past, but I swear I'll do everything in my power to make our future better." Sarah gazed at him, then at Hope. Her heart brimmed with a kaleidoscope of emotions: uncertainty, gratitude, a cautious desire to heal. "It won't be easy," she murmured. "We have a lot to work through, but I'd like to try." He exhaled relief, flooding his features. "We'll go at your pace. Whatever you need." She nodded, tears glimmering. Over his shoulder she saw a reflection in the window herself, William and Hope in his arms forming a fragile family portrait. Perhaps fate had brought them full circle. The child they created now bound them with a love that neither betrayal nor success could sever. For weeks they navigated those uncharted waters. William balanced corporate responsibilities with fatherhood, often losing track of time as he admired his sleeping daughter. Sarah slowly let her guard down, recognizing that while forgiveness would be a journey, she didn't have to walk it alone anymore. Each day, she felt stronger. Each day, baby Hope grew a reminder that life could emerge triumphant, even from heartbreak. Whether or not Sarah and William's relationship would fully mend remained to be seen. But for the first time, she believed in second chances. In a world as unpredictable as theirs, one truth shone clear. Love, when nurtured, can heal even the deepest wounds. And so from the frigid sidewalks of homelessness to the gentle warmth of a newfound family, Sarah and William's story shows that life rarely unfolds as expected, but hope can spark miracles. Their journey reminds us that every hardship carries the seed of possibility, and every broken bond can mend with genuine remorse, forgiveness, and perseverance. Thank you for joining me in this emotional roller coaster of heartache, redemption, and rebirth. If this story moved you, if you felt Sarah's struggles and found inspiration in her resilience, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support ensures we can continue creating dramatic, heartfelt stories that spark conversations and spread hope. Comment below. What part of Sarah and William's journey resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. Together we celebrate love's power to heal no matter how broken the path once seemed.